I enjoy this debate. I enjoy this conversation because a lot of Canadians look towards elected office, they look towards politics, and sometimes they have to then look away again because some of the activities they see, both in reality and that portrayed through movies and such, do not accurately, sorry, Siri wants to comment on my speech, that they don't accurately reflect what many of us are trying to do in politics, which is to simply represent people to the best of our abilities. Now, C-50, the timing of it, of course, was interesting, Mr. Speaker. It landed just after the Liberals broke their promise on electoral reform. We all remember it well because the Prime Minister repeated it so often. Before, during, and after the last election, that 2015 was going to be the last election under first past the post. Recently, just a few days ago, he gave an interview here in the Library of Parliament to the CBC where he said, "Nobody was able to convince me." Not all of the experts, not the tens of thousands of Canadians, were able to personally convince him that what all the evidence pointed towards was a good thing for Canada. In his not humble opinion of himself, that he needed that convincing that none of the evidence was enough on changing our system and evolving it into the 21st century. So the timing of the bill was interesting. We also see within C-50, which is broadly speaking supported by my colleagues and myself and the New Democrats in terms of the listing of donors beyond $200, that it is subjecting the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Ministers, party leaders, and those aspirants to become party leaders to a higher level of disclosure. Of course, all of this comes about because of Liberal fundraisers. That the origin, the idea of this bill was born out of the crisis of Liberal Cabinet Ministers and the Prime Minister himself holding these secret fundraisers in the private homes of billionaires and millionaires where there was no accountability at all, where we had the Justice Minister, the Finance Minister, actually holding meetings that were fundraisers, $1,000, $1,500 to get in the door, and the people that were being invited to these meetings had direct dealings with that Cabinet Minister's department. Just screaming conflict of interest all over the place. The fact that the Prime Minister was then later found to have broken 4 of our ethical rules in Parliament, or outside of Parliament, I should say, by accepting a trip with the Aga Khan, who the Government of Canada has had long dealings with, showed a moral and ethical code that was completely warped within this Liberal leadership. So the result of that, my grandmother used to say, don't ever waste a good crisis. You know, if you have a problem, don't just simply have the crisis and then forget about it. And C-50 is the result of Liberals going through the very public and political exposure of their ethical compass being totally off from what most ordinary Canadians would see as right behavior. That a Justice Minister should never, ever be accepting large donations, or donations of any kind, from lawyers who are also on the list of joining the bench. Why? Well, because it's the Justice Minister who's ultimately going to approve their ascension to that bench and become a judge. It seems obvious to me and to most people who have that kind of ethical core in there, but it wasn't obvious to the Liberals. The Finance Minister should not be meeting with Bay Street executives and accepting these large donations from the very same people over which he's the regulator. He's the ref. He's the one who's supposed to be making it fair for everybody, not just those that can pay the $1,500 and get into his private fundraiser. But Liberals didn't see a problem with this. That the Prime Minister was holding private fundraisers in the homes of wealthy billionaires so that millionaires could show up and give him $1,550 and then have dealings with some of their very specific issues that went ahead. So all of this was born out of the Liberals, in fact, and this is not easy to do all the time, were embarrassed. It's not easy always to embarrass a Liberal, but it happened. And the result of this is Bill C-50, which says now you've got to more publicly declare who's showing up. Oh, but wait, they wanted to leave themselves a little loophole, the Laurier Club loophole. See, because if you donate to the Liberal Party to the maximum amount, particularly at convention, under this bill, your name doesn't appear. How fortunate is that? That 5-day declaration that exists under Bill C-50, if you make your max donation to the Liberal Party at the convention, well, then you don't have to worry about it. The only filings come out are the filings that come out right now, which is when end-of-the-year reporting happens. So all of this transparency stops right at the door of the Laurier Club, this special donor elite club that the Liberals have set up to make sure that the money keeps coming in from their top donors. So we tried to close it. We don't, as New Democrats, we don't just want to oppose, we want to propose. And we said, well, why would you put this loophole in? It accomplishes nothing. It doesn't help in terms of transparency. And it seems to be almost handwritten by the chief Liberal fundraiser to say, let's not embarrass anybody by having to put them on a public list when they show up at our conventions as Liberals and donate the maximum amount. We said fix this. We also said allow the chief electoral officer investigative powers. Seems about right. The person who guides our elections, who tries to make sure that our elections are done fairly, should have investigation powers, and we moved amendments to allow that to happen. In fact, we heard from a former chief electoral officer about the $1,000 penalty that exists within this bill that was, in fact, done away with in the 90s as seeming as a non-deterrent. Because the incentive to do these sketchy fundraisers, as the Liberals have proven, the incentives are large. You can make a lot of money. So if you are going to put a penalty on it, you think the penalty would be more than $1,000, which is far less than the maximum donation someone could make at one of these potentially illegal fundraising events. So through all of this, we see the intention of the government. We see that they want to bring more openness to these private, very, very exclusive fundraisers where people in some cases are giving a great deal of money. We welcome that. We'd like the Liberals to show a little of that contrition that it's so hard to find around here, to acknowledge that it was born out of the controversy surrounding the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet who were engaging in fundraisers that were suspicious at best, if not right unethical, and to acknowledge what the central problem is and what Canadians, I think, and the people that I represent in northern British Columbia is they say there shouldn't be privileged access for those who have money. The wealthy and the well-connected should not simply get FaceTime with the Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers who have so much power under our system simply because they're rich. And yet, this bill maintains all of that. Nothing is actually done about the elephant in the room walking around, which is if you're loaded, you can get personal one-on-one time with this Prime Minister and virtually anyone in his cabinet. To be able to move your agendas forward, to be able to just say you know the guy and use that for your own personal advantage, that is all maintained. None of that so-called tradition is threatened at all by this. So one wonders just how far Liberals were willing to go, and we found out. Donc c'est un projet de loi C-50, c'est comme un projet de loi pour avancer quelques aspects de le problème de la donation pas très éthique, et les libéraux en ont fait un effort ici. On va appuyer la majorité de la portion de section de ce projet de loi. Mais il y a quelque chose qu'on peut améliorer ce projet de loi. Mais cette amélioration sont basées sur le témoignage qu'on a eu dans le comité. Mais les libéraux ont ignoré et voté contre chaque aspect, chaque amendement que l'NPD a essayé d'améliorer leur projet de loi. Mais ça, c'est la tendance de cette partie maintenant dans le gouvernement. En opposition, était différent. So in general and in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, that the aspects of C-50 in the whole accomplish a stepping up of transparency. The concerns we have is that cash for access, that tradition where if you have a lot of money, you're going to get personal time with the Prime Minister. And Liberals will now jump up and say, oh, but he does town halls. Well, congratulations. We all do town halls. Good for him. Nothing wrong with that. But to still have the large tendency to say, if you have lots of money, you don't have to line up for a town hall and sit in the crowd and maybe ask a question. If you have $1,550 to donate to the Liberal Party, well, then we'll get you FaceTime, we'll get you that sacred selfie, we'll make sure that you have time with whichever minister you choose, right up to the Prime Minister. Liberals maintain that practice. And they allow a loophole in this bill, which they're well aware of, that will make these very large donations not be transparent if they take place at a Liberal convention. And that's a missed opportunity, Mr. Speaker. But like so many opportunities when it comes to ethical behavior, Liberals are only too happy to sit on their hands and miss them. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments.